All right, before we get into this episode, we're going to make sure all the audio and everything is working well. So, if anybody in the live chat can hear me and there's no crackling or anything like that, please do give me a thumbs up in the live chat. And we'll see how this is going. All righty, looks like everything sounds good. Well, with that, friends, shalom to you all, and welcome to this episode of The Watchdog. I am your host, CJ Cox, here to tell you that we are living in biblical times. Want to remind you guys that this show is found exclusively here on the Synagogue News. So if you like this program, please do remember to subscribe here to the Synagogue News. Think like a Neanderthal, by the way. And hit that bell to get notified every time that we go live, which we try to go live on Tuesdays and Thursdays, but that's not necessarily a consistent thing, to be honest with you. Nevertheless, if you hit that bell, you'll get notified every time that we do go live, as well as when we're about to go live. You know, it gives you that little, hey, they're going to be live in 30 minutes kind of thing. And of course, we certainly do appreciate anybody who is subscribing. Also, want to remind you guys that you can follow us on any of the various social media platforms which you frequent. We are on most of them, namely Gab, Parler, Minds, Twitter, and Facebook. You can find me at the tag The Synagogue on any of those different websites. Certainly do appreciate anybody who is on those websites and is joining. Definitely is something we greatly appreciate. I want to personally recommend the alternative social media websites. Obviously, Elon Musk has just recently bought in Twitter, and so people are hopeful that Twitter might have a return to internet free speech. Maybe it does. I'll be honest, it doesn't really look that promising right now, considering the fact that he has banned some people who he does not like. For example, Bryson Gray and Kathy Griffin. But nevertheless, there are websites out there which do not have that history of banning people, right? Which are not beholden to either their respective governments or to their advertisers. Those are the alternative social media websites like Parler, like Gab, like Facebook, or excuse me, like Minds, not Facebook, Parler, Gab, and Minds. And so I want to recommend, if anybody here is on social media, please do consider getting on those websites in particular. Not that we are against the other ones. Like I said, I am on Facebook and Twitter as well, and you can find me at the tag The Synagogue on any of those websites. But we certainly want to be supportive of free speech online and of these alternative social media platforms. So I greatly appreciate anybody who is deciding to go to any of those platforms. Also, want to remind you guys that you can financially support this channel if you like getting your news here on the Watchdog. You can either contribute month to month by donating to our Patreon, which is, of course, a subscription-based service. We do not have any tiers, so you can give as much or as little as you like, and certainly anything that you give is appreciated. And also, if you only want to give one time, you can do that as well through our PayPal. If you give to the PayPal, it's just going to be a one-time donation, again, as much or as little as you like. And again, I want to say I greatly appreciate anybody who is giving there. Last thing I want to say as far as the channel housekeeping is concerned, remember, we are also on Rumble. We have a Synagogue channel on Rumble. It is only called the Synagogue there, even though it is certainly a Synagogue news channel and not a Synagogue apologetics channel. Nevertheless, if you are a supporter of this channel, we certainly do appreciate you going there and first off, getting an account on Rumble. Again, want to endorse alternative social media platforms. But on top of that, following us and subscribing there, because it is highly possible, in fact, likely, that at some point we will be kicked off of this program or off of this website, rather. There is absolutely there is absolutely no love for conservative political content on YouTube, right? And so because of that, we do have a Rumble channel as well. It's sort of like a backup, if you will, although we do also upload to Odyssey. And yeah, we want to just recommend that anybody who is supportive of us here definitely likes our channel there as well. Like I said, it's possible, in fact, likely that at some point that will actually be our main platform. And if you are interested in any of those things, first off, I will try to make sure I get all the links the description below. But also, they will be floating around in the live chat. So right now, we just had postings of all of the different financial ways that you can help us. And there we have postings of all the different, I guess the posting there for I'm going to have to delete that. Doesn't look like it posted quite how I wanted to as far as the links are concerned there. That's annoying. Anyways, we'll figure all that out at some point. We want to just go ahead and jump right into the program. But nevertheless, links to our social media and to the areas where you can financially help are going to be floating around in the live chat. Appreciate all you guys. So we have some pretty interesting stuff to talk about today. Before we get into this, I want to say briefly, there have been some developments on the Elon Musk ownership of Twitter. As far as Elon Musk's ownership of Twitter, he has recently decided to get rid of both Bryson Gray, who is a conservative rapper, probably most popular in our circles for being a, I guess, partner, if you will. I don't really know what else to call him, friend maybe, of Brandon Tatum, who of course is a popular conservative political commentator here on YouTube, as well as going and arguing with Ruslan about, the deity of Christ and certain things regarding politics and progressivism in the church and stuff like that. I don't really agree with a lot that Bryson Gray has to say, although I certainly don't disagree with all of it. The point is he has been banned from Twitter, which obviously seems to be against Elon Musk's whole "we're for free speech" thing. This isn't the first concerning development. Elon had already banned H3 Productions for impersonating him, even though they clearly described their channel as parody. Same thing with Kathy Griffin. And neither of those people are people who I agree with, but that's, of course, not the point. Free speech is not just for people I agree with. It's supposed to be for everybody, right? And so I certainly don't appreciate liberals being censored any more than I appreciate conservatives being censored. Also, he has been unwilling to let a lot of people who were wrongly terminated from Twitter back onto Twitter. For example, Alex Jones, Gavin McInnes, Milo Yiannopoulos, and we could probably name a few others, but those are just a couple examples to get us through this program. And he did not want to immediately reinstate former president of the United States, Donald Trump. Rather, he wanted to kind of drag his feet, first saying he wouldn't do it, then saying he would do it if the people said they supported it. And then once the people said they did support it, he decided to let him back on. Now, Trump has not actually returned, being that he has his own social media website known as Truth Social, or at least one that he's associated with. I don't know if he owns it or not. But regardless, the point is that Elon Musk appears to be not quite as gung-ho on free speech as he had initially said. Now, of course, there is some level of standard we want to have, right? And he has done some good things like reinstating, for example, President Donald Trump, reinstating Kanye West. He has allowed people to get away with more free dialogue than we had initially, even if it's not quite as free as he had promised. And from what I am told, there has been quite a crackdown on not only child pornography, which of course absolutely needs to happen because that's a crime, but actually just pornography in general on the website, which, if sources can be trusted, that's definitely good. So it's not all bad, but there has been some problems, and I think Elon Musk has turned out to be not quite as gung-ho on free speech as he had initially claimed. I certainly hope there's changes there, but nevertheless, we told you we don't necessarily trust Elon, and he has given us reason to believe that lack of trust was warranted. And so I just wanted to comment on that a little bit before we move forward with the program. But with that, let's go ahead and move forward with the program. So you can see the name of my video today is Let's Talk Youth in Asia. It is a portmanteau. I guess it's not a portmanteau. It's more of a play on words. Portmanteau would be a combination of terms. But nevertheless, I digress. It is a play on words because we're going to be talking about two different things. I guess really it'd be three different things, but nevertheless, one of those things is sort of two wrapped into one, and then the other is completely separated. But nevertheless, let's get back to what we're talking about, right? So we're going to be talking about euthanasia, as in assisted suicide in Canada, which I think has been grossly underreported. And there's been a whole litany of absolutely vile developments coming from Canada that I think even a lot of people who support physician-assisted suicide have been angry with. Now, I do not support physician-assisted suicide, but I do know a lot of people who do, as I am involved, of course, in these conversations and talk to a lot of people who disagree with me. And even a lot of the people who agree with physician-assisted suicide have been talking about just how absolutely disgusting the policies of the Canadian government are. In fact, we have a Canadian here in our live chat at the moment, Cryptomeria. By the way, Shalom, thank you very much for being here. Who is Canadian, and you can see if you are watching the live chat or here live. She says it is worse than you realize. And I have every reason, considering what I have read and what I've been told from my friends in Canada, I have every reason to believe her. So that's the first thing we're going to be talking about. But then also we're going to start talking about later on in the program, the protests going on in Iran and China, hence youth in Asia, right? So we're talking about euthanasia as in physician-assisted suicide. And then we're also going to be talking about youth in Asia, as in the protests that are going on the Asian continent, specifically in Iran and China, as well as Japan. But Japan's really just in solidarity with China. So that's the explanation of the title. Let's go ahead and jump right into the news today. And we're going to be starting, like I said, with the euthanasia in Canada. And our banner for today reads, Canada's euthanasia stories are vile. And believe me, friends, they truly and genuinely and verily, and whatever other adjective you would like to use to describe truth, are quite vile. This is not, of course, an exhaustive look at all the stories that have come out. It is simply two of the biggest stories that I saw. And so I'm going to be sharing them here with you guys today. The first one we want to look at, which comes initially from The Independent, is a Paralympian who also happens to be a Canadian veteran, claims that Canada offered to euthanize her when she asked for a stair lift. Now, to kind of lay out, and of course we're going to be reading the article, but to kind of lay out exactly what is being claimed here, this woman, who is, like I said, a Paralympian and a Canadian veteran, has had a significantly longer period than she is comfortable with in trying to get a stair lift for her home. Of course, the Canadian government is a pretty big welfare state, and so it is incumbent on the government there to take care of her here. And of course, some might argue that's a good thing. Some might argue that's a bad thing. That's not necessarily what we're here to comment on today. The point is that when she raised a complaint that it was taking a very long time for this stair lift to go through and to get set up in her house and all this other kind of stuff, and that she was in a somewhat desperate need of it, the Canadian government's response to her was to basically offer to kill her. In fact, not even basically. That's just the facts. That's what they did. They offered to euthanize her and said, essentially, hey, if life is so hard for you, we can go ahead and end your suffering by way of sticking a needle in your arm. And so we're going to read a little bit about that. And it's not the only story we're going to read about. I want to assure you on that. And again, this is not an exhaustive list of just how bad it actually is, because it is bad, friends. I'm telling you right now, north of our border, if you're an American like I am, north of our border, it is getting rough. And I want to say publicly while we're here, I've been saying for quite some time that I think Justin Trudeau is not incompetent. He's not stupid. It is much worse than that. He is evil. And I think many other members of the Canadian government are evil as well. And I stand by that, given the developments that have occurred in Canada since 2016. Justin Trudeau is not his father, who, from what I understand, I'm not super versed in Canadian history, but from what I understand, was a relatively good person. If anybody has anything that objects to that, please do let me know, but I digress. Justin Trudeau is he's not your father's, he's not your grandpa's, he's not your great-grandpa's prime minister of Canada. This man is a despicable tyrant. We should have known that when he was going to send tanks. Yes, tanks, as in the big, giant artillery cannons on top of vehicles, or I guess attached to vehicles. You guys know what I'm talking about. He was going to send tanks to end the trucker convoy protests, right? We should have known it then. And here we are, and we're figuring out yet again. So let's go ahead and read. I have a letter, says the Paralympian woman here, whose name is Christine Gauthier. I have a letter saying that if you're so desperate, madam, we can offer you medical assistance in dying. Christine Gauthier, told a Canadian Veterans Affairs Committee. Again, this woman served her country, and this is how the Canadian government is repaying her. A Paralympic Army veteran, a Paralympic Army veteran told stunned lawmakers in Canada that she claimed that a government official had offered to give her euthanasia equipment while fighting to have a wheelchair lift installed in her home. Now, I am going to go ahead and read that again in case you feel like you have gunk in your ears. I assure you, you do not have gunk in your ears. You heard it correctly, but just to ensure you that you did, in fact, hear correctly, I am going to repeat what I just read. A Paralympic Army veteran told stunned lawmakers in Canada when she claimed that a government told stunned lawmakers in Canada when she claimed that a government official had offered to give her euthanasia equipment while fighting to have a wheelchair lift installed in her home. So basically, we actually aren't able to help you at the moment, ma'am. We're sorry that it's taking so long, but if you'd like to die, we could go ahead and help you with that. And again, this woman is a veteran of the Canadian Armed Forces, served her country, was willing to die for her country, and is a Paralympian, which, for those of you who do not know, Paralympics is basically the Olympics for handicapped people, right? The Special Olympics, as they're sometimes euphemistically called. Let's continue. Retired Corporal Christine Gauthier, who competed at the 2016 Rio de Janeiro Paralympics, testified on Thursday that the unnamed Veterans Affairs caseworker had offered in writing to provide her with a medically assisted dying service, the CBC reported. Quote, I have a letter. The maid is underneath it. My apologies. A little dyslexic there. I have a letter saying that if you're so desperate, madam, we can offer you MAID, which is medical assistance in dying. Again, MAID, M-A-I-D, medical assistance in dying. Ms. Gauthier, 52, told a House of Commons Veterans Affairs Committee, according to the CBC. 3 other disabled veterans are believed to have been offered the same equipment, not the chairlift, no, the same equipment as in medical assistance in dying, according to Global News. So these veterans, and by the way, I would just like to point out here real quick, I said I wasn't going to comment on this, but I think I must. This is part of the problem when we talk about, hey, I don't know if we want the government to have control over our medicine and over our hospitals. Now, is some level of government aid in healthcare necessary? I'm not necessarily convinced, but to be honest with you, I'm not convinced of the opposite either, right? I think that it's certainly, well, let's just put it this way. Medical equipment and medical procedures are incredibly expensive, and they're also incredibly important, obviously, right? You can start paying tens of thousands of dollars for cancer treatments or for treatments, postnatal, meaning after birth, and so on and so forth, right? And I don't know if it's necessarily a good thing that you're essentially financially penalized for having a child or for getting cancer, which very often is not necessarily your fault. It's very often genetic or has something to do with, it's just the way the world works, right? It's Lord's will. But anyways, so I'm not necessarily saying that no medical assistance or no government assistance, in medicine is a good thing or a bad thing. But when we talk about, hey, we don't want a single payer universal healthcare kind of system where the government has control over all of it. I think this should be a little bit of a lesson in why, right? The government's response here when this woman said, hey, it's taking a long time for you to get me this chairlift, was to say, well, we could kill you if that would be better, which almost sounds like a threat, to be honest with you. It certainly sounds like cold, callous, apathetic hogwash, no doubt, but potentially even a threat. I mean, who knows, right? And Miss Gauthier is not the only veteran who's experiencing this. She just happens to be the popular one, probably because of the fact that she's a Paralympian. Nevertheless, it says 3 other disabled veterans are believed to have been offered the same equipment, as in the equipment that would assist them, quote unquote, in being murdered, which is essentially what would be going on here. It says medical assistance in dying, but let's call it what it is. It is MAME, medical assistance in murder. Okay, I guess it would be MAME with a silent B, in being murdered. But anyways, this actually did happen in Canada, and it's not the only thing that has happened in Canada as far as the stories we'll be reading today. Here is another one. This one not related to veterans, but still just as heinous, just as dark. Let me see here. Canadian parents, this is from National Post. Canadian parents have asked for medically assisted death for babies, doctors say. Yes, Canadian parents are starting to ask for medically assisted death for their young babies. Doctors say explicit requests for MAID, again, that is medical assistance in dying, have come from parents involving very young children. And of course, the article asks, should it be granted? Let's go ahead and continue. Some babies are born missing the upper layers of their brains. They have a brain stem that will keep their hearts beating and their lungs breathing, but there is no expectation they would ever experience thoughts or emotions or higher brain functions, said Dr. David Lisecki, a pediatric palliative care specialist. With surgery and life support, we can sometimes keep their body alive for years, but the child would never be able to process the outside world in a cognizant way, end quote. Now, as you can see here, this article is relatively short, but this article is essentially trying to make the case, well, at least this doctor is trying to make the case that it should actually be permissible for parents to ask for their very young children to be medically murdered. Medically murdered. Okay. Now, I would like to recall for you guys that a lot of us here on the pro-life side of things have been saying for quite some time that if you want to have abortion for any reason up until the point of birth, it seems like this would be right around the corner. And we were told, no, that's never going to happen. Well, here we are. It's 2022 and it's happening. And it's not just happening here, but it's happening in Montana as well, right? Remember referendum 131 in Montana where they said, hey, if a baby is born alive, including after a botched abortion, you have to give it medical attention. And Montana, red state Montana, having a conservative quote-unquote legislature and conservative quote-unquote senators and representatives and conservative quote-unquote governors and lieutenant governors voted no, we don't think that doctors should have to provide medical assistance to babies born alive. Well, it's happening in Canada as well. A little bit more explicit there, where people are actually directly asking for these babies to be killed. But nevertheless, it is going on in the year 2022. On this day, 12/13/2022. And by the way, I did actually not do my This Day in History. Maybe we'll do it at the end, but I digress. On this day, December 13th, 2022, we are experiencing parents asking for medical assistance in dying in Canada for their young babies. And this doctor we just read is trying to justify it by saying, well, we don't know if we're going to ever have any cognitive thought from these people. We don't know how in-depth their emotional lives are going to be. They might just be, stuck on a table with, life support being their only reason for living and so on and so forth. It's vile. It's vile. And it's happening right north of our border right now. And it's going to start happening here in the United States, by the way, friends. You mark my words. You mark my words. One thing that I have learned about geopolitics is that anything Europe and Canada does, America will very quickly do. Again, anything that Europe and Canada does, America will very quickly do. We're always just right behind. We're a little bit behind the curve, right? Everybody talks about being ahead of the curve. America's a little bit behind the curve, but we'll get there. We get there and everything else. Continuing, most parents, when faced with this tragic scenario, opt not to pursue aggressive treatments to prolong their child's life. Without interventions, the child will die slowly over the course of weeks. Quote, some families ask if they're going to die at the end of this anyway, which, of course, is the end result of life, period. Maybe 3 weeks from now, and we don't believe they're going to have meaningful positive experiences between then and now. Why must we all have to go through this period of waiting, end quote, said Lasecki, division head of palliative medicine in McMaster University's Department of Pediatrics. Lasecki will explain that hastening death is not legal in Canada for children, yet, I might add. Quote, I reassure them that we are and will continue to do everything that we can do to ensure that their child doesn't suffer now or as things progress, end quote, he said. It took 39 seconds to reinvigorate debate over medical assistance in dying on Friday when a member of Quebec's College of Physicians told a joint House of Commons committee studying the country's MAID law, again, medical assistance in dying, that deliberately and actively ending the life of an infant less than one would be appropriate, yes, appropriate, this person argued, in cases of grave malformations and where life expectancy is basically nil. I'd just like to, I think this is a good point for us to bring up the fact, anecdotal, I know, but nevertheless, it is true. I actually have a good friend. His name is Henry. I won't say his last name, of course, for his own privacy, but nevertheless, who was not expected to have a meaningful and fulfilling life, and who, in fact, even had a period right after he was born, where he was basically dead. Not brain dead, of course, but his heart had stopped. His organs weren't functioning properly. He wasn't crying like a baby is supposed to. All these other kinds of things, right? Nevertheless, he is currently living a robust and productive life, right? People recommended that he be aborted. Also, after he was not aborted, he had a brief period of death. It was said after that he's going to be mentally handicapped in such a way that he's not going to have a meaningful and fulfilling life. And yet here we are. The man is 25 years old. The man has a pretty kosher job, as a matter of fact. And the man is living a very impressive life. More impressive than many of ours, I might add. Dr. Louis Roy probably, was simply reciting a statement the college put out nearly a year ago in December 2021. After reflecting on expanding eligibility criteria for MAID, the college announced it supported the idea, of newborn euthanasia in cases with a very poor prognosis and extreme suffering that cannot be relieved. I want to say that again. This is not the Twilight Zone. This is not a horror movie. This is not 1984 Part 2 Canada edition. No, this is real life on December 13th, 2022, where this college, Quebec's College of Physicians, to be precise, announced it supported the idea of newborn euthanasia in cases with a very poor prognosis, talk about vague language, and extreme suffering that cannot be relieved. Which, while I certainly do not wish extreme suffering that cannot be relieved on anybody, let alone children, it must be noted that they are talking about killing these kids. It also supported extending MAID to 14 to 17-year-olds and encouraged more public discussion about endorsing euthanasia for seniors tired of living. Notice they literally said, and we also support killing 14 to 17-year-olds, which, by the way, who amongst us wasn't depressed as a 14 to 17-year-old, and seniors who are just simply tired of living. Which, by the way, you might be tired of living today. Maybe you're not tired of living next week or the week after, or so on and so forth. Continuing. By the way, Cryptomeria in the live chat points out Soylent Green was set in 2022. Life imitates art, and indeed it does, my friend. Indeed it does. But continuing. A video clip of Roy's testimony, Dr. Louis Roy, circulated on social media and sparked outrage among advocacy groups. Gee, I wonder why. Some said it was blatant infanticide. An infant, quote, an infant cannot consent to their own death, end quote, said Krista Carr, a hero if I've ever seen one, Executive Vice President of Inclusion Canada. Quote, this isn't MAID, it's murder, end quote. I would like to point out that Krista Carr supports medical assistance in dying, or what we might call medically assisted suicide, i.e. euthanasia. She supports it. But she rightfully, and I don't think that euthanasia should be legal in general, but this person who even thinks that euthanasia should be legal recognizes that what is being proposed here in regards to these infants is not simply medically assisted suicide, because a child cannot rightfully consent to its own medically assisted suicide. It is murder. It is absolutely, positively, without any shadow of a doubt, verily, verily, I say unto you, murder. That's what's going on. And shalom to you, Ryan. Appreciate you tuning in. I certainly do not blame you for your tuning out here today. I probably shouldn't be interacting with the live chat at the moment. It makes this news show seem less professional, but I digress. I appreciate you, brother. And yeah, I can't say I blame you for not wanting to listen to this. It's vile. It's vile. A spokesperson for the college later clarified that no one was suggesting killing babies born with physical or intellectual disabilities. Yet. 2 years ago, 3 years ago, 5 years ago, this wouldn't even been considered. Hell, 20 years ago, euthanasia itself was considered a taboo subject. So yes, we will get around to killing babies with simple physical or intellectual abnormalities. That will be coming down the pipeline. You mark my words. And if you don't mark my words, do so at your own peril. It's going to happen, friends. In fact, we already had a case in the Netherlands, what was it, a year ago, 2 years ago, where a Netherlands teenager actually was euthanized because she said she didn't want to continue living because she was depressed and suicidal, which is just doing the same thing as you would have done by yourself if you bought a pistol, I might point out. Quote, we are not at all talking about babies born with a handicap, end quote, said Dr. Elaine Nod, a family physician and clinical professor at Laval University, who is one of the most vocal advocates of assisted dying in Quebec. Quote, we are really talking about situations which at birth are incompatible with life in the short term, in a matter of days, weeks, or months. And of course, how often do doctors say, hey, X problem is going to kill you, it's going to kill your baby, it's terminal, do this, that, and the third, because we don't think that this is going to end up good long term, and they're wrong. It happens all the time, friends. They're not perfect. They might be experts, but as we can see here, some of them are experts with an agenda, with an axe to grind. They can be wrong. They very often are wrong. I have friends who indicate the fact that they are wrong. You probably have friends who demonstrate the fact that they can indeed be wrong. It happens frequently. And by the way, I would point out here in the United States that there is a Supreme Court case which has yet to be overturned, known as Buck v. Bell. Look it up. 1927, Buck v. Bell, the Supreme Court actually ruled that it was constitutional when the New York state legislature passed a law forcing the mentally unfit to be sterilized. Yeah, that's still on the books here in the United States, by the way. Look it up, Buck v. Bell, 1927. So you really think that's not right around the corner? I got a bridge to sell you if you don't. And even this itself is vile, even if that wasn't right around the corner, which it is. And we've already seen terrible examples of this, like, oh, seniors who are just tired of living. Oh, 14 to 17-year-olds. The fact that there's babies here in general. And, of course, we just read the story about the Paralympian veteran. So even if we're not there yet, which we will be, you know, if you keep going down the path, you will eventually end up where you're going, as Doug Wilson likes to say. We'll be getting there soon. But even if we weren't getting there soon, which we are, this is already terrible enough. It's science fiction. It's dystopian. It's horror movie stuff. And it's happening north of our border in a so-called free country. And it will be happening here in this so-called free country very soon. Mark my words. Again, I point you to Buck v. Bell. Again, I point you to the Montana Referendum 131, which failed. This is the world we live in, friends. Still, the Quebec proposal has bioethicists uneasy. I wonder why. Quote, I'm not convinced we need this, end quote, said University of Toronto professor Carrie Bowman. For Bowman, substitute consent changes everything. Quote, because it's not the wishes and values of the patient anymore, it's the wishes and values of the parent. Look, I get it. That's what we do. That's what parents do, make decisions for children. But it's not as clean a distinction ethically as it is when someone says, I've been living with this pain for 15 years and I can't do it anymore. That's very different from guessing what you think a baby would want, end quote. And again, I must specify that Carrie Bowman here, Professor Bowman, is a supporter of euthanasia, but still recognizes that this is vile and absurd. And again, I want to be clear for the audience's sake, I am not a supporter of medically assisted suicide. I think that we should, you take a Hippocratic oath for a reason. And this is definitionally a violation of the Hippocratic oath, which says that you will do I'm paraphrasing here, but it says that you will do no intentional harm and do everything within your power to help the patient, right? Anyways, though, the point is these people do actually support medical assistance in dying, and even they recognize this is absurd. It's crazy. How are we talking about this? I'm half expecting the next person to be Dr. Dahmer. Or maybe, I guess he ended up dying a converted Christian. Maybe out of respect, I should say Dr. Gacy or something else. I don't know. Who knows? God knows. There was also the implication that some severely ill newborn experience horrendous pain. Quote, I have never seen that, especially with babies, end quote, said Bowman, a clinical ethicist who had years of frontline experience working with high-risk pregnancies involving malformed fetuses and babies born with extreme disability. Serious disorders or deformities are often diagnosed in utero before birth during routine ultrasounds. Quote, this being Canada, parents have the option to terminate a pregnancy for any reason, and when fetuses are seen to have massive malformity, and that information is given to parents in many cases, though not always, they may choose to terminate the pregnancy, end quote, Bowman said, which, again, I strongly disagree with abortion, and I think that abortion is the start of the path that we're currently on here, but nevertheless, I'd like to point out, here we have supporters of abortion, supporters of euthanasia, who are recognizing that this is disgusting. What's that quote again? If you keep walking on the path you're on, you will eventually end up where you're going. Other conditions are the consequence of premature birth. When babies are born with a grim prognosis, quote, most of the battles are the parents saying, we want everything done, we're waiting for a miracle, even though the baby has had 4 or 5 massive cerebral bleeds, which, as you can imagine, creates a terrible prognosis, end quote, Bowman said. In other cases, life support, including artificial nutrition and hydration, is withdrawn or withheld soon after birth, and the baby dies a natural death. Quote, you can always induce constant coma to treat suffering, but what is the use of constant coma for a child, end quote. To treat suffering, not induce suffering. That's the opposite thing, sorry. Though rare, some babies are born with major defects of the heart, lungs, intestines, or liver. Some are born missing kidneys or with organs that have developed outside of the body. Now pointed to the story of a Quebec baby girl born with a rare bowel disorder who died 2 weeks after birth and whose parents had pleaded for doctors to end his life. The family told Radio Canada they were given 2 options instead: continuous care until the child died a natural death, which would take upwards of 50 days, or hasten death by stopping feeding. Quote, we don't do that to our animals, let them starve, but we do that to our babies, end quote, the child's mother said. Quote, you saw him there and he was in pain even on the morphine, end quote. And of course, these are just people trying to justify what is very clearly an absolutely vile act. We could continue reading this article, but we're not going to because we are short on time. We've already been going 40 minutes, and I want to get to some of the protests that we have to talk about here today. But suffice it to say, friends, with the stories that I have given you here, medical assistance in dying in Canada is off the wall terrible. We are talking about people recommending medical assistance in dying to 14 to 17-year-olds, recommending medical assistance in dying for seniors, quote, tired of living, recommending medical assistance in dying for infants who do not have the ability to consent on their own, and recommending medical assistance in dying to a Paralympian Canadian Army veteran. Actually, I think she was Air Force, but anyways, a veteran of the military nonetheless, for simply voicing a complaint that she had not gotten her chairlift in yet. This is where we are as a society. And I know I say we being an American, but I feel like the Canadians are close enough to us culturally that I can say this is where we collectively are. And you know what? It's all the same world. I certainly believe in national pride, but we're all the same race. It's all the same planet. We're all the same species of humans. We're all equally valuable before God. And I am absolutely disgusted. I wanted to come up here and say something funny like flabbergasted or something like that. I simply can't bring myself to do so. I am disgusted with what is going on here. And I certainly want us to be in prayer for the nation of Canada. Brief pause, friends. I got to let my dog in here. But we are going to come back here in about 30 seconds and discuss the protests going on in China as well as in Iran. I'm going to put on the countdown for you guys while we do that so that you know when we're back on. All right, so jumping back in with a little bit of a topic change, and we will continue to bring you more, Lord willing, on medical assistance in dying in Canada because it is a terrible story. But nevertheless, we want to get to some of the other stuff we have to talk about here today as well. So we want to talk now a little bit about China's zero COVID protests. The history behind these so-called white paper protests, which is actually the name of the article we'll be reading from Smithsonian Magazine, and what it means for us as well as what it means for the nation of China. So let's just go ahead and jump right into that. We're already at 45 minutes, and we don't want this to take too long. This is a brief history of silent protests from Smithsonian Magazine. Activists in China are using blank sheets of paper to speak out against the country's draconian zero COVID policies. Now, real briefly, I would just like to point out the incredible irony of this person saying that China's policies are draconian, which indeed they are. Let's not kid ourselves. China's policies are virtually always draconian, which for those of you who do not know, draconian means excessively harsh and severe. Tyrannical, you might say. You might also say, if you wanted to be a little bit more pungent with it, vile. But at any rate, it's just very interesting, though, to see these people say this is draconian when not 5 minutes ago they were supporting COVID lockdowns here in the United States and in Canada and in Britain and in Australia. And of course, we saw absolutely detestable things happening, like the military lockdown of an entire state in Australia. I can't remember which state it was, or churches being shut down by people who were armed to the teeth, and so on and so forth. We won't go through the entire thing here now, but I think you guys all remember what was going on in 2020 and in 2021. In fact, we covered quite a bit, specifically of the Tony Spell case, And thank the Lord he did end up winning, but I digress. So it's just funny to me to see these people who last week, it seemed, were talking about how China actually had the right idea in regards to their COVID policy. But now that the Chinese people have decided they are just absolutely not down, right? Bah humbug, they said. And now, all of a sudden, it's draconian. Now, I appreciate that we are now on the side of it being draconian because it is. It's disgusting. It's vile. It's tyrannical. It's despotic, etc. But I just can't help but point out the irony. Continuing, though, this article was written yesterday. The cry in Manhattan's Washington Square Park rose over the syncopated sounds of a jazz combo and a loudspeaker blasting rap. Clustered near the park's iconic arc, about 200 protesters joined to chant, "End the lockdown," they shouted, "Abolish COVID-0." A college student threaded past the participants, handing out blank sheets of white paper. The small crowd that gathered in New York on December 4th had joined an extraordinary moment some 7,000 miles away. Days before, in late November, hundreds of Chinese citizens stood in the cold night air of Shanghai, Beijing, and Guangzhou, holding aloft fresh sheets of paper in a silent demand for freedom from the country's zero-COVID policies, which have imposed draconian restrictions in an effort to eliminate the coronavirus entirely within the country's borders. Their strategic shows of defiance continued a long global tradition of silent protest in which activists register their discontent with wordless marches and long hunger strikes, or by kneeling down or taping their mouths shut, or in certain punitive societies, fighting propaganda and lies with a blank piece of paper. Just one moment, friends. Scrolling down here. Hushed protests invite the public to fill in the blank and add their own grievances. Quote, "It's a space for the imagination," end quote, says Christopher Rea, a scholar of modern Chinese literature at the University of British Columbia in Canada. Quote, "It's meant to be a provocation for anybody looking on. The blank piece is deliberately trying to frustrate this surveillance regime," end quote. And while I certainly appreciate that, I do definitely want to see something a little bit more severe than that, if I do say so myself. But, yeah, I guess it's easy for me to say, right? Very easy for me to say. Because I don't live there, I guess is the point. China's blank paper protests. 3 years into the COVID-19 pandemic, China still aims to suppress the violence through months-long lockdowns, travel restrictions, workplace shutdowns, ubiquitous tracking through cameras and cell phones, and rigorous daily testing. Just to go ahead and see everything there again. They had months-long lockdowns, which of course we experienced here, travel restrictions, which we experienced here, workplace shutdowns, which we experienced here, ubiquitous tracking through cameras and cell phones, which we almost experienced here, and rigorous daily testing, which again we almost experienced here, which I only again point out because I just think it's kind of ironic. I think that it's somewhat comical that people are that people are calling this draconian now and all that, and again it is. But they weren't 5 minutes ago, right? It just seems to me like an incredibly dishonest, attempt to get the people back on your side. And the really sad part about it all is that it's probably going to work, to be honest with you. I think the average human in the world, whether it be Canada or America or China or what have you, I mean, they're basically goldfish. And I don't mean to be insulting to the general population, but they are, right? They very often do not care whatsoever about what is going on 2 weeks ago because, well, that was 2 weeks ago. We care about what's going on now. And even then, only like 45% of it, if that, on a good day, right? Unfortunately, human populations are notorious for just kind of giving up and going back to whatever it is that's going to be provided for them. They don't want to cause a fuss. They don't want to start a ruckus, right? And so as a result, we typically see people just kind of retreating back to their hole. And so when we have all these people all of the sudden being on the side of freedom, everybody's going to say, oh, no, see, Smithsonian's on the side of freedom. Never mind the fact that the Smithsonian was shut down during 2020 and was supporting all this stuff in 2020 and was supporting articles which said, hey, China has it right back in 2020. Never mind all that. Now, December of 2022, all of a sudden, they've had an epiphany. They've seen the light. And everybody else is going to turn their lights off and start fumbling around in the dark, doing whatever it is that their handlers tell them to do. Welcome to the real world, unfortunately. The protocols, are sometimes carried out with brute force and what residents describe as an indifference to human suffering. Big shocker. The country that has Falun Gong, Muslims, Taiping Jews, and Protestant Christians locked up in concentration camps, the country that is harvesting people's organs, the country that once murdered something like 80 million people during Mao Zedong's reign, see Cultural Revolution and the Great Leap Forward, that country is indifferent towards human suffering. Shocking. What is it that Fry says? I'm shocked. Well, not that shocked. Lockdowns purportedly meant to halt disease have instead caused avoidable deaths. On social media, users speculated that one such shutdown played a role in an apartment fire that killed 10 people in Ürümqi, I probably said that wrong, I'm sorry, on November the 24th. China citizens know that despite the presence of infections, the rest of the world has, for better or worse, with the safety net of effective vaccines and antiviral drugs, returned to an almost pre-pandemic existence. Not really, but whatever. People elsewhere go to offices, shop at malls, travel abroad, and cheer from the stands at World Cup matches. Virtually nowhere except China has a government continued to keep its citizens housebound, as was the norm worldwide in the pre-vaccine era of 2020. Whether China's zero COVID strategy is working is up for debate, particularly given the government's tendency to undercount cases and deaths. President President Xi Jinping has staked his claim to power on the policy's success. But as the virus morphs with ever new variants, case numbers are spiking in part due to the use of less effective local vaccines, and unrest is mounting. Notice the article's got to push that vaccine, right? Got to push the jab. Bang, bang. Blanket suppression is the government's preferred method of containing COVID-19, argues the nascent white paper movement on its website, quote, because the epidemic is the best way to strengthen social control and maintain domination, end quote. Now, I must point out that vile companies like Alphabet, owners of Google and Facebook, which is, of course, owned by Meta, and Twitter, before Elon Musk had gotten a hold of it, had actually been suppressing things like the white paper movement's website and also communication between protesters, which is nothing new. They were doing this back when the Hong Kong protests were taking place. They were doing this in various other countries when we had protests against election fraud or protests against vaccine mandates or something, or things of that nature. The point is that these technological powerhouses are in bed with tyrannical governments. But we continue. Launched on November 28th, the grassroots campaign initially asked for an end to lockdowns that have pushed millions into joblessness and poverty, stalling the nation's economic growth. The crowds that came out to shout down riot police later expanded their demands to call for democracy, an end to censorship, and even the removal of Xi, who abolished legal term limits in 2018 to potentially remain in office for life. Not potentially, without being overthrown, he will remain in office for life. That was sort of the idea of abolishing term limits. And by the way, votes don't really count in China anyways. It's a one-party state, but regardless. In a country where dissidents can disappear into black site prisons for years while awaiting trial, the public outcry stunned even some participants. Days after the show of widespread discontent, the Chinese government eased many of its most restrictive COVID-19 rules and policies, a move that experts say could spark waves of infections and deaths in a country ill-equipped to handle mass hospitalizations. So notice that these so-called experts, these filthy mutts, actually that's insulting to dogs. Dogs are one of the kindest species on the planet. these vile pigs, they're actually saying, oh, no, don't do that. Don't do that. That's going to cause a wave of infections and death. No, we support the draconian measures. We, the experts, have spoken. The FUDs and our followers, the FUDites, who will do whatever it is that we wish, have spoken. And we say that lockdowns are actually a good thing, and that if you decide to get rid of these restrictive COVID-19 policies, which the whole world in unison was saying yes for just 3 weeks ago, you're actually going to lead to a massive outbreak of this disease, which you actually have more of a chance of dying from the vax than you have a chance of dying from the disease if you get it. Oh, shoot. Did I just say that out loud? Sorry. Remember to go to the Rumble account and like us there. Still, activists say they're just getting started. The possibility of real change in the authoritarian country drew a range of protesters, among them Uyghurs, which is the predominantly Muslim ethnic group that lives over in, I believe it's called Xinjiang. Many of them, of course, being in concentration camps at this point. They've had mass rapes going on in that area. Not that anybody here in the United States has cared, right? We still trade with them. We still allow them to be a leading voice in the United Nations. Disney still goes over there and does movies, so on and so forth. Tibetans. Tibet, of course, is an independent nation, or at least should be, that China conquered back in 1951, overthrowing its native government. Hong Kongers. Hong Kong is, of course, the little city island off the coast of southern China that, for some god-awful reason, Britain decided to give back to the Chinese government on the promise that they would respect Hong Kongers' democracy, which, of course, did not happen. Or the Hong Konger system of democracy, I guess I should say. And Chinese students studying abroad to Washington Square Park in early December. Quote, "There's no way to share real thought in China," end quote, said the paper pusher at the Manhattan protest, who gave his name as Rick, a handle the undergraduate admitted was fake, as he was nervous about the government causing trouble for his family back in Guangzhou. Rick had friends who joined the rallies at home, where censors stayed busy erasing any mentions of the protests from social media, sometimes in seconds. He explained, quote, "The blank paper means we want to say that every social class has their own demands. We want to be treated with dignity of the person to make a living. We want democracy," end quote. And by the way, I do feel the need to mention here, while I certainly appreciate that we are talking about what's going on with the Uyghurs and with other Muslims in China, and I certainly appreciate that we're talking about what's going on with Tibetans, and I certainly appreciate that we're talking about what's going on with Hong Kongers, and I certainly appreciate that we're talking about what's going on with just Chinese citizens in general, how dissenters have their organs harvested and stuff like that. I appreciate it, but I must point out that it seems like every time we talk about Chinese tyranny, conspicuously missing from the list of tyrannized peoples is the Christians who have been put in concentration camps en masse after being sold out by the Pope in the Vatican, the Sino-Vatican agreement, Sino-Vatican provisional agreement, of 2018, back in September 2018. After that, of course, there was a massive crackdown on anybody who did not fall in line with the state Catholicism that was endorsed as a result of that agreement. Not that it had ever been very pleasant for Christians in China to begin with, but nevertheless, it got much worse after that. And for some reason, these articles, I know what the reason is, by the way, it's because they hate Christ. For some reason, these articles constantly have those people conspicuously missing from their lists of oppressed peoples in China. And by the way, I would like to point out also Falun Gong as well. But we continue. Silent protests around the world. Protests are usually thought of as a big, noisy, sometimes raucous affair where agitated participants clamor for change with catchy chants and splashy banners. But silence can be an equally effective tool for sparking change. In an authoritarian state with mass censorship, simple words and images can become crimes. For example, the reason I call Xi Jinping Winnie the Flu, or just Winnie, is because a group of Chinese college students compared him to Winnie the Pooh, said he looked like him, and he ended up banning all depictions of Winnie the Pooh or Winnie the Pooh merch or media rather from the borders of China. You're not allowed to have any pictures or media reflecting Winnie the Pooh or any of the characters associated with Winnie the Pooh in China, because a group of Chinese college students compared Winnie Jinping up there to Winnie the Pooh. The Grand Pooh Bear is another thing you can call him. Please do spread that, by the way. Owning silence under such circumstances creates power, says Jeffrey Wasserstrom, a historian specializing in modern Chinese history at the University of California, Irvine. When a protester joins a crowd and says nothing, they deny the state the tools to suppress. A silent citizen's words cannot be taken away or used against them. In recent years, protesters worldwide have confronted their government with blank slates. Earlier this year, Russians who opposed Vladimir Putin's invasion of Ukraine were roughly removed from the streets after holding up blank pieces of paper in response to a law that banned uttering or publishing the word war in reference to the military campaign. I do think that the reporting against Russia is somewhat unfair, but Putin is still definitely the bad guy, for sure. Like, there's no doubt about that. But, you know, even the good guys are unfortunately guilty of propaganda. By the way, if you're interested in a really excellent piece, and in fact, a collection of pieces on what's going on in Ukraine, I would like to recommend Simon Whistler's Warographics. They do many things on the Ukraine war, but nevertheless, it's not what we're talking about today. In Hong Kong in 2020, citizens stunned by the arrival of a new security law lodged their fury by holding up fresh sheets of printer paper. Authorities have arrested nearly 200 people under the law. One man was sentenced to 9 years in jail for carrying a flag bearing the band's slogan, "Liberate Hong Kong, Revolution of Our Times," end quote. And of course, we could continue, but I want to get to some of the other stuff here as well. The point is, and you can see there is much, much, much left to be read. The point is, there is pretty massive protests going on in China, and they kind of seem to be working, amazingly enough. Now, what exactly is going to happen here? I guess I don't know. Maybe the end of some of these draconian measures could potentially happen. But is it going to go any farther than that? I'm not optimistic. But then again, I have never in my short 24 years on this planet seen the Chinese government kowtow to their people in any way. Usually they just crack down harder and harder and harder. But here it does seem like they might actually be willing to stand down. And, you know, give an inch, take a mile. It's possible the people of China might end up getting maybe not everything they demand, but certainly some of it. Maybe they will get democracy. Maybe the Grand Pooh Bear actually will be removed from his leadership position in China. Maybe they'll stop threatening Taiwan all the time. Maybe we might see some people leaving the concentration camps. I don't know. Again, I'm not really optimistic when it comes to these sorts of things, because China in many ways has kind of been Mr. Untouchable. You know what I mean? And that's not really, I don't know. It seems hard for me to believe that that's going to change. I mean, they have a permanent spot on the UN Security Council. They've gotten away with anything they wanted to do in regards to Tibet, in regards to the Uyghurs, in regards to Hong Kong, in regards to Taiwan. It doesn't really seem like China is going anywhere, because they've never gone anywhere before. At the same time, though, I mean, we gotta give some credence to the fact that it really is impressive what's going on in China right now, right? They have never, ever backed down in the face of their people's protests, and yet here they are. Here they actually have ceased with some of their more despotic COVID-19 restrictions. The zero COVID policy appears to be weakening. And now, again, will that go as far as removing the Grand Pooh Bear? I don't think so. I have a tough time believing that. I want to be optimistic, but I realistically have a tough time believing that, especially when you have all the different things that I just mentioned. But it is worthy of note. This is a great time in history in China. This is a time in history that 20 years from now, you know, I was born in 1998. The Tiananmen Square incident happened in 1989. And by the time I was reading books, which you got to think, 3-4 years old, something like that. By that time, Tiananmen Square was already a major moment in modern Chinese history that people were talking about frequently. So 13 years from now, right, we might actually end up having history in China books, history about China books, talking about modern history of China that are talking about this event. It may happen. It may also end up being just another thing like the Hong Kong protests of 2 years ago that everybody kind of forgets about. We'll see what happens. I don't know. But nevertheless, I do think that this is a pretty major moment. And though I don't want to get too optimistic, I still think we're still going to have threats against Taiwan. We're still going to have restrictions on Hong Kong. We're still going to have Muslims, Christians, and Falun Gong in concentration camps. They're still going to harvest organs from people. Winnie the Flu ain't going nowhere. I'm not very optimistic, but I do think there's going to be at least something accomplished because, again, there's the old saying, give an inch, take a mile. And for the first time in my lifetime, the Chinese government has given its people an inch. And may they take the mile and 7 more. We'll see what happens. Anyways, we got one last article to discuss, friends. By the way, I want to quickly give a shout out to some people who are here in the live chat. I already shouted out to Cryptomaria and Ryan. Yahoo is also in the live chat, as well as Kevin's Biblical Discussions and Kyle Gearhart. Shalom to you all, and thank you very much for being here. I appreciate you guys tremendously. Remember, please, to like and share this video. Consider subscribing to the channel if you have not done so. Hit that bell to get notified every time that we go live. We try to go live on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and greatly appreciate every single one of you guys who are here and who are supporting this political punditry, I guess you could call it. I'd like to consider myself an amateur journalist, but I haven't actually really done enough to earn that position at this point, I think. We'll get there. We'll get there. All right. Last thing we want to talk about here is another protest going on in Asia. This one specifically in Iran. I know a lot of you probably don't think of Iran as being an Asian country, but the Middle East, the whole Middle East, the entire Middle East is in Asia. I guess unless you consider North Africa part of the Middle East, but I don't think most geopolitical scholars typically do. I don't know what this commercial is. It's very stupid. Sorry about that. This one from ABC News, although I initially got it from Yahoo News. Another protester is executed in Iran as demonstrations enter their 4th month. It's really a shame that this is the first time here on the Watchdog that we have been discussing what's going on in Iran, considering not only it's been going on for 4 months, but also it's actually even a bigger deal than what's going on in China. Not because what's going on in China is to be poo-pooed or anything like that, but because what's going on in Iran might actually end up having some real serious impact. For those who do not know, there was a young Iranian woman by the name of Mahsa Amini who died while in custody. Now, first off, she was arrested for not wearing her hijab. It is mandatory that you wear a hijab in Iran. And while I certainly am no supporter of the flagrantly sexual way that Western women dress, I do appreciate that they at least have the right to choose for themselves, right? And by the way, the hijab doesn't really cover up anything anyway. I don't understand. We're talking about covering up boobs and stuff like that. They're talking about covering up hair. But regardless, I think we very often don't realize just how lucky we are to live in a country where we're arguing about whether or not people should make certain moral choices. Whereas in these other countries, the government has made the moral choices for you, and they're typically stricter than anybody wants anyways. And I think that that's a very important thing to point out, right? As bad, as angry as a father might be seeing his buxom daughter in a bikini being given the goo eyes by all the men in town, at least she's not being stoned to death, right? So you win some, you lose some, I guess is what I'm saying. Anyways, Mahsa Amini was arrested for not wearing her hijab. She ended up dying in Iranian police custody. And what the Iranian police claimed was that she died of some kind of a massive heart attack and that they tried to help her, but that, in fact, they weren't able to do anything. And she had already died by the time medical assistance arrived. Video evidence later came out, which demonstrated that first off, nobody actually tried to help her. She collapsed in the middle of the police station and was essentially just left there for minutes on end, which, of course, when we're talking about a heart attack, minutes are very important. And witnesses came forward which said that she was actually beaten, bloody and bruised, and just as vile beating as you could possibly imagine. Beaten near to death before she had actually been taken into the police station. And many people believe that this beating is what caused whatever it is that killed her, whether it be a heart attack or something else. We may actually never know. And so this sparked a bunch of massive protests of, women burning their hijabs. More power to you, by the way. Very appreciative to see people actually standing up against this vile regime. But anyways, and a bunch of people coming out in solidarity with them. And here we are in the 4th month of these protests, and some of these protesters are being executed because, of course, they are. This is Iran we're talking about. I mean, what did you think? This was Scotland or something? Well, I guess Scotland back when it was an independent country might be pretty draconian itself. But at any rate, let's get into the article. The second public execution of a protester comes after Iranian police handed down several death penalties to those protesting the Iranian government after the death of Mahsa Amini. It did the thing. Why did it do the thing? I hate it when this happens. Hang on. I think I can get the article back. Sometimes when I get an article that is actually from a different website than the one that I'm actually getting it from, it only gives me the title. Or, as is the case here, it'll give me the whole article and then kind of just spontaneously disappear. So, just a second. I'm going to see if I can get the whole thing up. By the way, I see Chris Lucas in the live chat. Shalom to you, and thank you very much for being here. Whack. Super whack. Mad ultra whack. All right. Well, here's what we'll do then. We will man, I want to talk about this. Hang on, we'll find something. Just a second, guys. Stupid. No, you didn't come on here to hear me sing, but nevertheless, I want to sing about how stupid this is. I hope at the very least the show is entertaining for you guys. Certainly not news you'll have to do. All right, we're going to go to CNN. And that's going to be what we read from. Apologize, friends. Oh, I got to change my banner also. Man, just all sorts of messing up here. That's all right. All right, so this article from Certainly Not News, otherwise known as CNN. Second known protest-related execution carried out in Iran. Let me go ahead and get the proper banner up as well. I am asking, is Iran on the brink? I think it very well could be, especially considering the fact that it's already an incredibly impoverished nation. China has a lot of things going for it in that it is a permanent member of the UN Security Council, and it's one of the wealthiest nations in the world. It is the most populous nation in the world. Its government has been long entrenched, right? It is 1949 when the Communist Party came to power. So on and so forth. They control most of the world's manufacturing. There's a lot of things that China has going for it. Iran has almost nothing going for it, right? Iran is poor. The Iranian citizens don't like the government. They only became the Islamic state in 1979, which means my own father, I'm only 24, remember, my own father, if he was born in Iran, would have been 8 when this government was established. So many people remember the time before, right? There's embargoes on them. Nobody trades with them. They have virtually no manufacturing at all. They don't really even have that, that much of a natural resource pool. And the point here is just to say, whereas China might end up, and in fact probably will end up surviving anything that comes its way, Iran has a very strong likelihood of having its government toppled. which is why I say here, is Iran on the brink? I think it very well might be. And by the way, speaking of the aforementioned warographics, if you guys want to see a more in-depth look at what's going on in Iran, they have actually done another very excellent piece talking about these protests. Anyways, let's get into the article here. Second known protest-related execution carried out in Iran. Iran has executed a second man allegedly involved in the nationwide anti-government protest movement after he was convicted of fatally stabbing 2 security guards last month, Mizan Online, a news agency affiliated with Iran's judiciary, and the semi-official Tasman news agency reported on Monday. Mizan Online named the man as, I'm totally going to butcher this, I apologize, friends, named the man as Majidreza Rahnavard. Majidreza Rahnavard. Actually, probably wasn't that bad. He was convicted of waging war against God for reportedly killing 2 members of the Basij paramilitary force and injuring 4 others on November the 17th, the outlet said. Now, remember, for context, friends, the reason they say waging war against God here is because Iran is an Islamic state, right? Their government is led by an Ayatollah, and an Ayatollah, for those who don't know, is a high-ranking religious scholar in the religion of Islam, right? It's specifically the religion of Twelver Shia Islam, which is almost endemic to Iran, though not entirely. And it's, it's a kind of an honorific. You could compare it to the English knight, but not really, because it is specifically given to somebody who is considered to be a great scholar, somebody whose opinions actually carry a lot of weight amongst those who believe Islam. In fact, it would be a better position. You might be able to compare it more accurately to saint, although even then, still, Catholic saints, of course, have to die before they're sainted and stuff like that. So there certainly is still differences there. But nevertheless, it is an Ayatollah who leads Iran. And their government does have Islamic law as the law in, over the country. The nation's official name is actually the Islamic Republic of Iran, right? And it is technically a republic. You can vote for your president and stuff like that. How far does that go when you have the Ayatollah as the supreme leader who rules over everything? Well, not really that far at all. But anyways, the point is, their legislature is known as the Islamic Consultative Assembly. Their government is officially listed as a unitary theocratic Islamic republic, so on and so forth. I don't think they actually recognize any religions outside of Shia Islam, but I could be wrong about that. Somebody Wikipedia it for me. Anyways, the point there is just to say, when they say waging war against God, as far as the state is concerned in Iran, if you wage war against the state, you are waging war against Iran, or against God. And this is part of the reason that we get the rhetoric from them that we do, right? Like wanting to throw the Jews into the sea. Well, just read the Quran. Islam does not look upon Jews very fondly. There's a passage actually in the Quran that actually it's not in the Quran, it's in the Hadith, but nevertheless, it talks about how there will come a time in the last days where the Muslims will be hunting down all the Jews, and the Jews will hide behind a rock or a tree, and the rock or the tree will say, Muslim, Muslim, there's a Jew behind me, come and slay him. And so you can see, of course, why they would want to throw the Jews into the sea. Also, why they call, America the great Satan, with Israel there being the little Satan. All of this rhetoric goes back to the fact that they are a Islamic republic. And this is why you have phrases like waging war against God. If this man really did stab 2 members of the paramilitary force here, security officials, I think would be their specific title. That's what the article here says, at least. Then, as far as the state is concerned, this man was an insurgent fighting against God's government here on the planet Earth, which I believe the Islamic government teaches is flat, although they obviously would not believe that because otherwise, how would they fly planes? Just had to throw that little jab in there because it's funny to me. Anyway, back to the article. The charge of waging war against God carries the death penalty under the theocracy of the Islamic Republic since 1979. Ronavard was hanged in a public execution in the northeastern city of Mashhad early Monday morning, it's said. So that would be December the 12th. Although for us, it would probably be December the 11th because they're like 10 hours ahead of us or something like that. Ronavard was hanged in a public execution in the northeastern city. I just read that. Sorry. He is the second known person to be executed in connection to the 2022 protests. His death comes less than a week after Mohsen Shekari, the first known protester to be executed, was hanged last Thursday. Several more Iranians have been, or Iranians, excuse me, I'm trying to get better at pronouncing that accurately, have been sentenced to death by execution during the nationwide protests, which were sparked by the case of 22-year-old Masha Amini, who died after being apprehended by the state's morality police for allegedly not wearing her hijab properly. In case you guys thought that I was straw-manning the wonderful Islamic Republic of Iran, of course I'm speaking facetiously, yes, that is actually why she was arrested, and she was arrested by the morality police. And by the way, that is the literal English translation of what they are. Their job is to enforce Islamic morality. So just remember, to all of my Christian friends, when you look at the world and think to yourself, man, it's really gotten out of hand. It's super immoral. That is true. However, at least we're not these guys. And I hope many of you guys don't want to be these guys. I hope that we all have good respect for the freedoms that we possess here in the United States of America or in other countries elsewhere, you know, diminishing though they may be. And though we certainly want people to carry themselves in a more morally robust fashion, we're asking people to carry themselves, not the state to beat the all-living hell out of them and then have them have heart attacks in the middle of the police station, right? So count your blessings is my point. Public anger over Amini's death has combined with a range of grievances against the Islamic Republic's oppressive regime to fuel the demonstrations, even in the face, of harsh punishments and possibly the death sentence. Certainly Not News cannot independently verify the number of people facing executions in Iran, or the latest arrest figures or death tolls related to the protests. Precise numbers are impossible for anyone outside the Iranian government to confirm, and of course, even then, we're never going to get the correct estimates or correct numbers from the Iranian government because they want to cover everything up, as despotic regimes since the beginning of time have wanted to do. The chief back in the caveman days was covering up his foul deeds, right? So there's not any reason we should be shocked at that. Last week, Amnesty International said it had identified at least 17 others, in addition to Ronavard and Shekari, who are at risk of execution in connection to the recent protests. And I believe that's the end of this article. I didn't read this one first. Yes, it is. All right, so there you guys go. This is what's going on in, my goodness, why am I losing my train of thought? In Iran. My apologies, friends. They're having these protests because a 22-year-old woman had a far too early death at the hands of these police officers for not wearing her hijab properly. I say far too early, but do bear in mind that from the human perspective, it was her time. Lord gives, Lord takes away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. However, that, of course, does not mean that this is not something that is egregious and terrible. It's just I always feel weird when I say before their time. I literally believe in Calvinism, right? So it's like it's technically nobody dies before their time, given my belief system, right? You go exactly when you were supposed to go. I digress, though. This is not a theological channel. The point that I'm trying to get at is this woman could have lived a solid 80 years, if not longer, under normal circumstances. But instead, the pigs who run this government and the pigs in the police forces, who are meant to enforce, incredibly important things like how you wear your freaking hijab, right? If it weren't for these dogs, which is an insult to dogs, this woman would actually still be alive. But instead, because she didn't wear her hijab properly, she was beaten nearly to death and then ended up dying probably of her injuries as a result of this beating. And the people of Iran are pissed. And the people of Iran may be waging quote-unquote war against God, according to the Iranian government. But it's a good thing that I don't believe in the God of Islam. Otherwise, I might have to have a problem with what I'm about to say. But what I am about to say is wage and wage more and wage more still. Continue fighting until you have won, until you have beaten them, until you have broken them down. Iranians, I don't know if any of you guys would ever hear this or even if you could understand it, but I'm just going to speak it into this void anyways, because I got at least 6 people listening to me, and they may all be English speakers in the United States or Canada, but I don't really give a crap. Fight and fight and fight some more until you break the yoke that binds you. Because there is a very, very real possibility that the Islamic government in Iran could actually end up falling. And if it does, I think that would be an absolutely beautiful thing. Anyways, friends, we're going to go ahead and get out of here. I didn't share my This Day in History fact with you guys earlier when I usually do, so I'm going to share it with you now. On this day, December 13th, 1769, Dartmouth College, which is now Dartmouth University, one of the Ivy League schools, was founded by a Reverend Eleazar Wheelock. And again, that was in 1769. It's actually not only one of the 8 Ivy League schools, it is one of the, I believe, 9 schools, because one of the Ivy League schools, I believe Cornell, is not actually founded before the foundation of America, but 7 of them, as well as Rutgers University and William and Mary University, were founded before 1776, or 1775, I guess to be more precise. And Dartmouth is one of them, being founded only 6 years beforehand. And it was on this day, December 13th, 1769, that university was founded. And so there's your This Day in History, little Ivy League history for you. But at any rate, we're going to go ahead and get out of here, friends. If you liked this video, please remember to like and share this video. Please consider subscribing to the channel if you have not done so, and hit that bell to get notified every time that we go live. Remember that you can also follow us on various social media platforms. Links are going to be dropped into the live chat now. I am on Gab, I am on Parler, I am on Minds, Twitter, and Facebook. And I want to give a special shout out to Gab, Parler, and Minds, as these are, excuse me, as these are the alternative social media websites. And I believe that alternative social media websites are vital to us getting a return to free speech on the internet. I don't want the government getting involved. I don't trust Elon Musk or Twitter or anything else like that. But nevertheless, I do greatly appreciate you guys who are following me anywhere there. I have to post these links one by one, so I do apologize if it's a little bit annoying. Also, want to remind you guys to follow us on the Rumble account. We said some things today and say some things quite frequently that do very often get censored. We've been censored here before, despite having only 76 subscribers. We will be censored more in the future as this channel continues to grow. So with that, friends, I do appreciate anybody who decides they are going to be following us on the Rumble account. It's not live there. It's posted after the fact, but eventually once we start getting proper income from this, we will actually be going there and going live there as well. And yeah, I certainly just want to recommend getting on Rumble because, for all we know, conservative content on YouTube may at some point be dying. And in fact, it probably even some point soon. By the way, speaking of financial stuff, you can also give to the Patreon or PayPal if you seek to help me turn this into a full-time career. If you guys think that this news is worthy of, the kind of position that your Ben Shapiro's and your Chris Matthews of the world actually have. Now, of course, we do want to recommend you only do this if you actually believe it is worth that, because there is an absolute glut of news in the world, and a lot of it's crap. So, only give if you think that I am definitively not crap. But at any rate, if you guys want to subscribe, you can give as much or as little as you like to the Patreon. I certainly appreciate that. And if you want to give one time rather than month to month, you can also give one time to the PayPal, and I certainly appreciate that. And also, by the way, don't feel obligated to do any of it. While I certainly appreciate it, we're going to keep coming back regardless. So, anyways, let's see here. Any questions here in the... Appreciate that, Kyle, very much so. Very good friend there. In fact, one of my best friends, to be honest with you. Appreciate that you support this channel. Appreciate you as well, Jamie. No, not Jamie. Excuse me. I'm reading your comment. Sorry, Chris. I appreciate that I've been able to introduce you to a lot of the stuff here. And Cryptomaria as well. Appreciate you tremendously. Our token Canadian, which was incredibly important today because we were talking the first 45 minutes about Canada. And to the rest of you guys as well, appreciate you tremendously. We're going to get out of here. I want to remind you guys to be watchdogs. And, of course, want to ask you guys the question, in the face of Armageddon, will you compromise?